All right. So, the Goodell Multiverse podcast.
First one, kind of.
Yeah.
Test.
Yep. Test number 1. I'm Sam Goodell.
I'm Isaiah Goodell.
We are the Goodell Brothers.
That's right.
Watch out, Russo Brothers. No, just kidding.
Yep. We'll make the better X-Men movie.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. We've been excited to do this for a while now, just because whenever we get together, we just talk Marvel. That's
all the time.
Mainly, and it's not off the table. Any Marvel movie, MCU or otherwise, X-Men is like our diehard that we can spend hours, days just talking about.
We could almost do a whole podcast just on our X-Men stuff, but we're just going to kind of include it. Maybe certain episodes we'll do just some X-Men. Mm-hmm. Seeing that we're going to have X-Men movies coming up, we're going to want to talk about the old ones anyway. And
yeah, and so if you're tuning in and listening to this for the first time type thing, and this is a test, so everything looks very unprofessional, but it's kind of supposed to be that way.
Yeah.
We're just doing this for fun. This isn't how we make our living. We just like to talk, and we figured might as well just start recording it, because one of the things that I've noticed in particular is that some of our thoughts and feelings on the movies or the shows or anything going on in the MCU world, we're like, oh, we like this, or oh, we don't like this. And then we hear the popular narrative out there is they don't like something that we like, or we like something they don't like, or, or vice versa, things like that. And I like that we're doing this because it gives another voice to those narratives out there to say, well, Thor: Love and Thunder, let's just throw that out there right in the beginning, because that's probably one of the biggest movies where it gets the most criticism. Not the only one, but one of them, post-Endgame. And we actually kind of expected what that movie was going to be like. And it lived up to that, would you say?
In fact, it was one of the movies that we saw recently post-Endgame that afterwards we looked at each other and said, for the first time, we felt like we were back in the MCU.
Mm-hmm.
And it was clearly... a couple days later, we were very surprised to find out that the majority of people that do have platforms to talk about these movies didn't like it. And I was, hey, movies are subjective. They don't have to like it. It's fine. And we're not telling them they're wrong. Maybe once in a while you'll hear me say something like they're wrong for fun, for comic stuff. Yeah. But the truth is, though, is sometimes I do wonder, though, where they come from and what they say. And we have no money in the game, though. So there's no one that's going to send us some script that we're going to read because we say something nice about the Marvel Universe, and then we'll call them out for their bad and their good, or what we consider as good and bad. And as long as we don't take ownership, and we can have fun and speculate and say that, but we'll announce that, obviously. We'll say when this is what we would definitely do, but and whether it's right or wrong, and sometimes I will defend something that we don't like we'll get into Iron Man 3, because then that's going to be a good discussion between you and I. I know you've come around on it a little more so, but I will always defend their choice that they made, because it's their movie, it's not ours, But that's not an excuse. It's okay. We can not like it too at the same time.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not the worst of the movies out there. So, but yeah, Thor: Love and Thunder for sure. What do you want? I mean,
well, like you said, the movies are subjective.
Yeah.
And even
I'm upset with the fans about Thor in general. They decide they want a certain Thor, then they give it, and they want a different Thor, then they give it, and they don't like that Thor either. It's like, well, so what's your Thor then? I mean, that's one of those where, it's all subjective and everybody can be right or wrong, but they've given us several different versions of Thor, and it seems like it's always divided. And I'm kind of, it's annoying because it's, hey, you want serious Shakespearean Thor? Well, you didn't like that because you didn't like Thor 2, which was way better than you said. And so they went a little sillier with them, and you were okay with it at first, but now you definitely don't like it. And we got the mid Thor, and we got Fat Thor, which I think is a stroke of genius. And some people don't like that either. And it's like, well,
what do you like? Yeah,
you got to pick a Thor here. There's only so many different kind of Thors we can do.
Yeah. And honestly, you better be happy that they did that with Thor, because now, no matter what type of Thor you like, there is a Thor of that out there in the MCU. That you like the Norse mythology version of Thor more. Thor 1 and 2 probably be more up your aisle, or the first Avengers Thor, that's probably up your aisle. If you want him a little more loose, a little more comedic, than Ragnarok. For me, when I went to the theater to see Ragnarok, I was taken back because I thought, whoa, it's such a departure from what I knew of Thor, and I wasn't expecting it to be as edgy and push the funny. But in retrospect, it's one of the best Thor movies they ever did, story-wise. And so when the same people behind Ragnarok were doing Love and Thunder, I expected that. And as every movie does with the having a previous movie from the same team, they tried to up the antics, whatever it may be, story-wise, comedy, things like that. So I expected what we got in Love and Thunder. So therefore, when I went into the theater to see it, I wasn't disappointed. But then that's when you heard the critics out there, which they have their opinions like I have mine. They just have, like you said, a bigger platform sometimes. They could write it in a Hollywood Reporter and it's going to be out there and all that stuff. And they did not like it. And part of me is thinking, you asked for this. So, yeah, I think it's overhated. But I do see the flaws in it of how much too much comedy could be pushed. But I also am, and like balancing of the scales, like, I expected it. So.
Yeah, and I think what's more concerning and why that's why we want to do this, why we talk about all the time, and like, I'll say it one more time, we'll say it often, that movies are a taste for everybody. So what you like and what I like might be different. We're going to find lots that we're different on, for sure. But it does sometimes, like this Thor thing you're bringing up, seems like Marvel has listened to a lot of people because they're telling us now that we're going to take Thor in a different direction. It's not going to be as silly, and Taika Waititi's out. And it's like, well, why? I mean, he made one that was kind of decisive, that other people didn't like. I don't know, the other one he made was perfect, almost. Mm-hmm. And most think it's great. Mm-hmm. So, and I personally kind of want to see that trilogy of his that could potentially be the better of the trilogies out there of the Waititi Thor trilogy. Mm-hmm. Because now you're looking at the progress of Thor, and he's a father now. I'd love to see a comedy fatherhood Thor movie. Yeah, let's see it. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what we got with these other ones. There's always a purpose of what he is. It's all this family themed that they did in the last two. Let's go ahead and see a happier Thor for one. Because hey, Thor's got something to live for. Let's see a movie where he doesn't lose somebody, where he has somebody he cares about, where he is happy, and it's still funny with some stakes involved. Mm-hmm. And Taika Waititi, let's do it. Just someone have a seat with him and say, hey, let's just dial back a little bit of the comedy. Other than that, it's going great. Dial it back a tad. Like, let some of those real serious moments linger a little longer. And then you can still throw in the fun.
Yeah, because, I mean, in retrospect, rewatching Thor Love and Thunder, it's not... How do I say this properly? Like, I get the people that have their gripes about it. I do understand that. When you're watching in the goat scenes and some of the Thor loving his hammer a little bit too much, be like, okay, that lasted longer than it should have been. I get the comedic tone you're trying to set, but some of those scenes could even be cut out, if not trimmed down from 5 minutes to 2 minutes or whatever. But when it got serious in that movie in particular, Jane Foster with cancer, learning that the gods that these people are worshiping are not all they're cut out to be, and gives a little validity to what Gore is doing. Like, when it got serious, it got serious.
Yeah, because it's not even the comedy that they have a problem with. They're also saying that Gore wasn't good. And I'm sorry. That's where I'm going to comedically tell you, no, you're wrong. I mean, there's a list of Marvel villains, and we can go right down through them. And yeah, you could pick apart him a little bit. You might not like everything he decided to do with it. But first of all, Christian Bale usually doesn't put out a bad performance. And you're going to have to prove to me it's a bad performance before I think it's a bad performance when it comes down to Christian. And that is the bias in me. But as someone that has seen a lot of movies and all of his stuff, I haven't seen anything of his that was been put out bad. I've seen movies he's in that weren't that good, but he's not bad. And including Thor, he's not bad. In fact, when he's sinister in it, he's sinister in it. We have talked about this before. Maybe could have used a couple scenes of him doing some really cool god killing. Would have helped the movie a little bit. Although, as his performance and all that, you don't like it and you're saying it's bad, that's you getting in with this group mentality of just not liking Thor because it's silly. And I truly believe that. And you're going to have to prove that otherwise to me. If you want to even argue about it. And when I say argue, it's not like one of us has got to win. But I like a good debate. And if you want to debate that, that's cool. We'll debate it. But come prepared, because you got to tell me how Christian Bale's bad before I agree with you. Mm-hmm. There's other actors in all these movies that we can say we expect to kind of fail us sometimes. But not him. And he didn't. And it was good. And it might be a weird version that you didn't like of it. But hey, it's the movies, man. It's not the comics.
Yeah.
And on top of it, what else do you want? The bad guy. This is one of the few Marvel movies that I like for this reason alone, is the bad guy actually wins. You know, I know we can all say, yeah, Thanos won too. Yeah, but that there's a continuation to that and everything. There's a moment in this movie, in Thor Love and Thunder, where he ultimately won, and that was it. It was his decision to make that at the end that determined what happens next. And he could have easily said, yep, kill all gods. And we'd have been with an MCU with no gods.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
And there's nothing he could have done about it. There's no, let's go back in time. Let's use all these things.
That could have been
it just would have been the end of it, right then and there.
Yeah.
So you're talking about a villain that won, that had an arc that we saw go all the way through. It's like, yeah, don't like Thor Love and Thunder because it's too silly. I got you. I hear you. But don't tell me there's the bad things that are good. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. And Thor Love and Thunder is just one movie of all that we're going to be talking about. But even that's one of the things that I think that people are going to know first off when they're listening to this or watching us or whatever, however you stream and you're watching and listening to us. We're diehard X-Men fans, not just X-Men fans in general. Like, we like the Bryan Singer X-Men films.
Yeah, we're not afraid to say Bryan Singer's name. So
yeah, I know. Yeah,
regardless of what you guys, whatever is out there in the universe of what he's done or was alleged to do, he made good movies, and I'm going to give him that. So
yeah. So if you're someone who, and I'm going to say it for both ways, if you're someone who agrees with us that X-Men Apocalypse is probably one of the better X-Men movies out there, or disagree with us in that, we want you to listen and we want to hear your input. Mm-hmm. If we have a comment section, if we're on YouTube, things like that, we want to hear you voice your opinion, because this is a free speech platform type thing that we all give our opinions and we could debate them. We could go through each one of them. We can say where we think you're wrong and you can point out where you think you're right, vice versa. And,
just be warned. Yeah. When it comes to X-Men, we are the most passionate. So,
oh my gosh,
bring it.
Yeah,
but we will talk about it for sure because it's X-Men Apocalypse is arguably the closest to what you'd ever want X-Men to really be.
Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, "Oh, there's so much wrong with it. The villain isn't good. They don't get the suits. They're not really the X-Men." That's the point of this movie. They were not the X-Men, and they became the X-Men by the end. But I think people miss that because all they want to see are the classic 90s outfits, which, by the way, is the only time you ever got to see them. Like, their follow-up.
The closest to it, yeah.
Yeah, their follow-up from that should have never been made. I think everybody would agree to that. That was just one that they were like, let's wait for the MCU to figure out how to do it. Because obviously, the people behind that they did not know. They were blind enough or naive enough to think they could do a different twist to the comics or to the original intent of Jean Grey, and ultimately, Fox had two shots at it. Mm-hmm. Arguably, the one that people don't like, X-Men 3. Of the two, X-Men 3 versus Dark Phoenix, they like 3 versus Dark Phoenix.
3 is a masterpiece compared to Dark Phoenix.
Yes, and we do have our gripes about number 3. One of which Bryan Singer just didn't do. But anyways, but at least what I'll say about that one is that is the closest to the Jean Grey that we were anticipating that we liked for Dark Phoenix was an X-Men 3. There still were flaws, but it was nothing compared to what they did with poor Sophie Turner, who, by the way, casting, amazing. Sophie Turner, she executed the role. She showed that she could do a standalone film, in my opinion, and doing that, like, she had it. It was just not the proper script for it.
Yeah, this whole situation is similar to the Thor thing, where you got to pick what X-Men do you want, because they're trying to give you these options, and it doesn't seem like you're happy with any of them. The only gripe that we've always ever had was they never really had the power or the encouragement, or what we say, the courage to give us seasoned X-Men. And what we never did get out of the Bryan Singer stuff, other than I would argue maybe Days of Future Past, is we never got our seasoned X-Men from the 97 that we want to see. Which includes never seeing Cyclops really being Cyclops. Mm-hmm. Which sucks because both versions of Cyclops and the two people that played him, I thought did very well. And we never did get to see Cyclops the way we saw Cyclops every week on TV. And it's just because they were afraid to take that step because someone had to gripe about the last X-Men movie. Mm-hmm. And it was like, so which one do you want? It's you can't get that picky about it. Some people don't like the old ones because of the black suits and they made it too modern. It's like, yeah, but if they'd have went old school, they'd have said that it's too cheapy or too cheesy and too campy. It's like, well, hey, let's pick one.
Well, that's to your point there. That's one of the things that we had talked about yesterday when we were just talking about doing the podcast and everything. It's that, unfortunately, due to some, ironically, very comic accurate but poorly done for movie translation movies in the 90s when it comes to comic book movies, the X-Men had to look a certain way for the general audience to be palpable enough to them. So not everyone likes the full-on black suits, and I get it because us hardcore fans want to see the color that they brought in the 90s. But you have to remember that some things in the comic books, it's harder to translate them into the movies. And thankfully, we've gotten to that point in pop culture and movie culture and everything where we can see Wolverine in his classic outfit and everyone accepts it. It looks good and everything. But at the time when they were beginning in the early 2000s, you couldn't just throw that on there because it just looks like another cheesy superhero movie that no one would ever take seriously as a genre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this speaks to time and generations because we kind of had this discussion yesterday, just talking alone about it. I made a crazy declaration that there's a couple of 90s comic book movies from Marvel that are better than over half of the MCU movies that we have. Thomas Jane's The Punisher, Blade 1 and 2. And I'm sure there's people right now that would flip their seats right now just hearing that. But go back and watch those, really watch them and try to take out that bias of thinking of that old, they got a bad rap and they're a little cheesy. And then look at some of the stuff we've gotten from the MCU. I'm not saying the MCU is bad, but I am saying the one trend that they started was they made it popular to be a fan of this genre. When those movies came out, it wasn't popular to be a fan of that genre. So you couldn't do Hugh Jackman in the yellow spandex then because you'd just been, look what the nerds are making. Mm-hmm. When now it's like the nerds are making movies. Mm-hmm. So the nerds aren't watching them no more. They're the ones making the movies. So now it's like, why not do the yellow spandex? Mm-hmm. That's what we wanted back then. We never got it then. We'll do it now. Mm-hmm. So it's not that those were bad. And that's why I don't ever want to take away from them. So you got to kind of look at them through a different lens, And I'll even say this: another big hot take is, the Green Lantern wasn't that bad. I mean, it's not the best, but I know he jokes about it when Ryan does his stuff. But go watch it and then compare it to Ant-Man: Quantumania. You tell me which one's better.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I was just thinking about that this morning because DC Studios is coming out with the Lanterns show. Yeah. Everyone right now is on a gripe online
I've heard this,
about the outfit looking brown, that doesn't look like the Green Lantern. And even the guy who was behind it is noted on an interview saying everyone agrees the green part is stupid. Well, and I'm not that much of a DC knowledge guru type thing. I'm more Marvel based, and that's mainly what we're doing is Marvel. But we will touch upon DC because it's comic books and superheroes, and we like them.
Yeah. Superman sucks.
But for Green Lanterns, like, from my understanding of it, the whole point of the Lantern Corps is there's different colors of them, and they all mean different things.
Yeah.
And so I find it's so funny that some of the same people right now that are complaining there's no green, and that the suit actually comes from the ring like it's supposed to in the comics, and it's not an actual suit you wear, are the same people that just a few months ago would have said Ryan Reynolds' Green Lantern was too cheesy because of the CGI suit coming from the ring and it looking too colorful and all this, and be like, you got to pick a lane, because if you don't like this new one coming out, how did you hate the other one? It's kind of like with Thor. Which version really do you want? Because they're trying to give you different takes of the same character and same genre. And if you're not biting for any of them, there's no pleasing you.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I haven't seen the trailer yet, and I have heard some of the scuttlebutt about their issue. So I don't want to speak too much on how well I think the show is going to be, because I've only seen images. But from what you just said, at least, what I can comment on is, on your priority list about how good the show is going to be, their costumes should definitely be somewhere around the number 10 range, because if you're going to go into a movie worried about what they look like, and that's going to be what you decide that whether you feel like it's going to be successful or not, then maybe you shouldn't watch it, because film and comic books and all that are separate mediums, and we'll have this discussion a lot because it happens a lot. And I know, like how with you, it's more, you are very interested in what they look like sometimes, and you're not wrong, and I am too, actually. I mean, there are times where I'm like, I really do care what they look like. I do have to say, though, you could almost completely change their look for me, though, as long as the character's good.
Mm-hmm.
So, if these guys, I'll check the trailer out, and we'll talk about this again in the future, for sure. But if it doesn't look awful,
mm-hmm.
then what's it matter if they don't look the same as the ones before, you know? That's where the ownership of things comes in, where you let them tell their story, you know? And I've never really given a gripe about costumes in them. Sometimes there's a couple I think are a little silly, you know, but I've never given too much of a gripe. To me, that's so far secondary or towards the end of what's important. Mm-hmm. You know, obviously I want it to be practical. I want it to look good. You know, I'm glad they got away from like superheroes being in scantily clothing, because if you're going to go into battle and you're fighting people, you're not just wearing a bikini. You know, I know comic books had their place for that because that was a draw to bring in the boys and the nerds, and they're all crazy. But, you know, we don't need to see Scarlet Witch half naked. I'm glad she has a suit on, you know. But whether that suit's the color it is or not doesn't matter to me. And it doesn't change how good it is. She could have been in a pink one, and it still would have been a great character, you know. So, although at the end of the day, I'm glad they picked the color they did, you know, and I would have probably picked that as well. Like, I wouldn't want Magneto in a pink Magneto suit, you know. But it would have changed how good the character was? No, I don't think so. You know, but obviously we want it to be. Yeah. I do like things to look as close as they can, as long as it works. Yep. If it looks ridiculous, then call it out. But no, that looks good there, but it doesn't here.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because we will, when we're going to do movie reviews on every single MCU and MCU adjacent movie that's out there. And on our scorecard, we have appearance, on how these characters are portrayed by the actors, how well they're acted, and how they just look. Because that's beyond the actor's control. That's the clothing department's job to get that wardrobe and all that right. But there are some characters in the comic books that you read, and even you watch the 90s cartoons or the cartoon version of them, you'd be like, oh, that's really cool and entertaining to us. But will that ever translate properly to the MCU or to a serious movie? And the answer is no, it won't. And so you have to know your audience. And so for people that don't like, for instance, Apocalypse or some of these other characters out there that are villains, they're not sinister enough, they're not mean enough, they're not serious enough, or they're too serious or whatnot. You have to remember that if you got exactly what the comics portrayed them to be, the movie is going to look weird. And I think that we, in the midst of our fandom of these characters and the ownership that we take of them personally, because they all mean something personal to us as we're growing up and everything, we have to remember that there's a creative team behind these movies that have to look at it from a movie lens, not a comic book lens. They inspired from the comics, but translated into movies for a bigger audience to like too.
And sometimes it works and it doesn't work, you know, and that's a good thing about trying it. I mean, of course, when we go into Doomsday and we get to see Cyclops be Cyclops and he's in his blue and yellow, that's going to be awesome, right? We all want to see that. But I didn't mind Cyclops back when he did X-Men either. You know, we just need Cyclops. It doesn't necessarily need to be, heck, you can be in a jean jacket and shorts. As long as he's doing Cyclops stuff, that's what we want. And a great example of one that would have looked real silly and hard to do is Apocalypse. And if you got the look from the comics and the cartoons with him, oh my God, that movie would have been a way weird movie. You know, and I actually was even kind of, you know, worried back in the day about how Thanos was going to turn out for that reason. And I still will be honest with you, aesthetic-wise, I mean, awesome character, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong, one of the best villains ever. You know, Josh Brolin, great role. But it's heavily CGI. I'm curious to see what that looks like 30 years from now. And because right now it still looks decent. But 30 years from now, when, you know, you're looking at what Cameron's been doing with all that CGI and help me out there with those movies I don't watch. Avatar. Yeah, I mean, say what you want about Avatar. I know a lot of people like them. I'm not a big fan, but boy, they do look good. And you know, that the CGI there doesn't really hold up well if you think about it. There's a few MCU times, even some that we'll talk about when we get there, where I'm like, ooh, that CGI didn't say that well. Yep. You know, and it doesn't take it away because I don't mind. To me, I kind of don't mind the cheesy. You know, I still think Jurassic Park 1 looks fantastic. And, yes. And it kind of does. You know what I mean? Like, but there are moments where you can be like, oh, okay, I can see where it's kind of failed a little bit, you know, but that's okay because it does what it's supposed to do. But as for looks of the characters, another great example of when it does work when they take a chance is one of the best villains in the MCU is the Green Goblin. Now, you go back to the uniform they gave Willem Dafoe, and it's not like he's in a freaking motorcycle helmet. You know, and people joke about it. But if I told you Green Goblin right now, what's something you don't like about him? Unless you just don't like the character, which is up to you. You're not going to say his suit. No one thinks about it. They think it's almost, could you even in your head right now think of what the Green Goblin looked like in the comics before they did Spider-Man 1?
I mean, I know enough of the comics that I could, and thanks to No Way Home, that's what they did. They mimicked it. But even then,
but what did it look like in the comics before that movie?
Oh, yeah. Way
Most
different.
people couldn't even think of it, right? And so if you're a purist, then you can't like that character.
Yep.
Because they kept that like that, you know, and it's fantastic. So, you know, it's a matter of that should just be lower on your priority.
Well, that's a good example, Green Goblin, of does the comics translate well to the movies, and especially during the time when Spider-Man, I mean, a lot of people would have to debate on who actually launched the MCU into stardom before the MCU type thing, and some people would say X-Men, some people would say
Blade.
Well, see, that's the thing. In the early 2000s is when I would arguably say, for Marvel at least, I mean, no offense to Blade, because Blade was great and good and everything, but when it came to like pop culture, accepting Marvel,
especially franchise, because that's what Spider-Man ended up. They wanted to do anyways.
A lot of people would argue, was it X-Men 1? Was it Spider-Man 1? Spider-Man arguably is more kid-friendly than X-Men, so therefore it's going to grab a bigger audience. And I feel like that's one thing that Marvel probably regrets of all their things that they sold out was the rights to Spider-Man, or not the rights, which John Campea actually has a great breakdown of where the Spider-Man rights actually are, so I do encourage people to listen to it because he's a cool guy and breaking that down. But the Spider-Man, if you looked at the first movie and you looked at Green Goblin and you are a purist and you look at the comic book version, they don't look the same. And
no,
it's a good thing that they don't, because if you look at the comic books, the guy would have to dress up in like this rubber mask or make himself look like that. Maybe get the prosthetics to look like the brother of the Wicked Witch of the West in order to look like the Green Goblin. And that would just turn into, again, another cheesy looking superhero movie that they're already trying to make Spider-Man himself look appealing enough. And they kept him comic accurate, but trying to do that with every single of his villains, let's face it, when these comics were made in the 60s and 70s and all that stuff, that they looked cheesy because they're supposed to be cheesy. It's a comic book world. It's a way to escape the real world coming out of World War II and all the stuff going on with our personal lives. That's why you and I talk about Marvel, because we have enough with our work lives and what's going on in politics, whether you like it or not. It's like, it's good to tune that off for a while and watch a Marvel movie or watch a Batman movie or whatever, just something to not think about it. And I will, on that, for a quick note, this isn't a political podcast, so we're not going to be talking about what the Republicans are doing or the Democrats are doing. We don't care what side of the aisle you're on or your opinions on that, because we have our own opinions. But one thing that I will say in regards to the politics of comics that I've noticed personally is that depending on who's at the wheel and who's at the helm of some of these movies, some political agendas may be inserted into them, and therefore, because it's in this realm that we're talking about, we will address it and we will say, oh, does that actually work? Sometimes it might not be what our politics are, but it works out for the movie. And then vice versa. Sometimes they'll push that political envelope a little too much. And I noticed personally, especially in the X-Men fandom, it could get very toxic and crazy. And I think that there's no voice out there, at least is predominant enough, that would be either a pushback to it, that would be a little, actually, literally more inclusive to it, to what X-Men means to some people versus the others. And so that's one reason why I'm glad we have a podcast like this, because if we do talk about, because X-Men in particular, very politically heavy when it comes to it. That's how they were made to be, is to bring marginalized groups at that time, especially, to the forefront and represent them in a mutant-human relationship type way.
Well, it's all about civil rights.
Yeah.
Just you're looking at it through the eyes of mutants.
Yeah, exactly. So that will be touched upon when we talk about those movies and where we stand by it, where we think the characters actually are versus what the popular fandom will probably say about it. Or at least, I wouldn't say the popular fandom, the loud, vocal part of the fandom would say about it, because not everyone's going to talk politics.
Yeah. I'll touch on that politics thing just one time here, and without talking about politics at the same time. I have seen a lot of movies, and what I think that's going to be unique about this podcast, if we get somewhere with it, we get a lot of viewers, and it ends up being something that we hope it does, just like anyone does when they start something. Mm-hmm. You're going to find out that Sammy, my brother here, he is definitely the comic book guy. You know, he's the one that we're going to turn to and be like, hey, you know, how is this character and what's it supposed to be, or to get that information, he's going to be that guy, and he's going to be very true to that. And he's seen a lot of movies as well. I won't take that away from Sammy. Sammy's watched a lot of movies. I've also seen a ton of movies, and I've been in the movies for a very long time, and I watch everything. I could do a whole separate podcast just on all other movies if we ever wanted to. With that said, I will say that the worst movies, or the ones that I tend to not like the most or turn me off the most, are ones that do have a political agenda. Now, it's okay to talk about a subject through a certain lens. I get that. And it is art, and art is expressed through feeling and how you feel about stuff. But if you are pushing it because it's popular, or because you feel like it's the way to fit in, it will show. You know, AKA the newest Captain America movie. And if it wasn't for the political issue with that, it may have been a better movie, because I feel like a lot of the bandwagon of being on the right side of whoever's in charge at this moment, or whoever's signing these paychecks, is what pushed a narrative of a film that just didn't work. You know, and then when you're clearly trying to make the political stand on it, it's kind of like, hey, look, that's not what we came here for. Now, you can still touch on those things. You can still have those things. We don't have to talk about who likes Democrat, Republican. I'm not even going to tell you which one I am. You might be able to figure it out eventually, but it doesn't matter. You don't need to know. You know, I don't want to see a pro-Trump movie just as much as I don't want to see a pro-whoever on the other end movie. You know, if I do, and they make a movie for them, I'll watch that movie. But don't disguise it in our other stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's where I have, if we're going to do a pro-Trump movie, make it that movie. You know, don't make a movie that's not about him or about someone else, or a negative Trump movie, however you want to look at it. I don't disguise it in our stuff that it just doesn't need to be there. You know, there's so much rich material and ideas that you can put in there that you don't need to make a discussion about what's going on today. We talked about that already. Mm-hmm. When we turn these movies off, we're saturated with what's going on in the world. Mm-hmm. You know, the idea of these movies is so we don't got to think about that for a while.
So when you put it in our face like that and you make us think, oh yeah, that's why this is the way this is. Yeah. And Captain America, to bring it into what our podcast is about. We'll get to it when we get there with that. Captain America, Brave New World, or whatever the hell it's called. Mm-hmm. Because it's saturated with, well, we got to make sure we fall on the right side.
Yeah.
And that's a problem, and it made a bad movie. And these actors, if they want to have an opinion, they want to say what they want to say, they can say it when they're not on the screen, and they get all these award shows and all that stuff to do whatever they want to do. I'm not even a huge fan of watching those because of the way it's become political.
Yeah.
So that's as close as politics you're going to get from me out of all of it. Yeah. I'll call it out on either way. And even if I agree with what they're saying, I will even say that's a little preachy. Mm-hmm. But let's not go there because you don't need to.
Yeah.
And like X-Men is talking about a marginalized group of people already. It doesn't need to be added on that there's more to it. Mm-hmm. Where the idea of what we're talking about is already there. So let that be what that's going to be.
Yeah.
We don't need to go into the bigger purpose of it because that's when you're trying to, now you want me to believe something that I just want to watch a movie, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you need to tell me that. Obviously they shouldn't be treated that way. It doesn't, it has nothing to do with what you're talking about now. Mm-hmm. It's X-Men. We're talking about people that talk to people in their minds and move metal and, and heal and have knives come out their hands. I don't know. It's sure there is a time and place for those sensitive things, and we should have those. There's a lot of good films out there that we need to watch and we need to have that do have some sort of a political stand to make. But that when you're getting into it. So that's kind of how I feel about it.
Well, I'll piggyback onto what you said in regards to the political end of things, that the fandom on both sides of the political spectrum can be super, super toxic. We see that. It's not a one side versus the other in regards to, this one's always worse and this one was always good. It doesn't matter where you personally stand on politics. We know that a majority of the Hollywood branding is leaning one way versus the other. Yeah. And the vocal part of it. So if you, just saying, because I'm not going to say what my political affiliation is, like Ike said, eventually you're just going to see it as a natural thing because that's just part of us. That same thing with you. You can find out a lot about how the person kind of votes just based on their lifestyle and what they choose to do and all that stuff and say and whatever. But one of the things I will say is when an actor is hired by a company, the company executives, they want everybody to watch their movie because they're looking at the bottom line. They're looking at, how do we make this Marvel movie $1 billion movie? Well, you can't make it if you're alienating one side of a political spectrum versus another. You want to kind of bridge that gap and have it be for everybody. But of course, the actors are going to think a certain way, whether it's ultra conservative wise, like in the way of Chris Pratt, or ultra liberal wise, like in the way of Tatiana Maslany. And then you have to look at, okay, how are they contributing to the Marvel narrative? Because, and I'll say this as an example of this. Captain Marvel, I love the Captain Marvel movie. I thought they did that movie really well. Yeah, I thought it was good. I actually, it shocked me because in the beginning when I first watched it, and when we do a Death of Captain Marvel, the first movie, then we'll get into it in more detail. But it was kind of weird for me to see, was there actually a villain? Was there not a villain? Who was the actual hero? Like, it's obvious Captain Marvel, but what's this story about? And it really, I've rewatched it multiple times now, and it's just a good origin movie for who Carol Danvers really is, and how she embraced being Captain Marvel of her own free will. But I remember at the time when the movie came out, there was a lot of a negative backlash in the fandom, the ultra conservative part of the fandom, because she made a comment about someone interviewing her on the red carpet or something to that degree, that all you could see online were woke feminist says this or whatever. And all I'll say to that is you're going to get toxic people in the fandom that are going to say things regardless because they look at a certain actor that was hired and they know where their political leanings are, because everyone's allowed to have an opinion in this country, and they are not immune to that just because they're in the field that they're in. But you have to take that lens off because, in my opinion, because Captain Marvel was a good movie. And maybe she said something that didn't jive with you, but that's not how you need to paint the whole movie on. And it goes the opposite way when someone is still of the same mindset and says something similar to that, and their movie or show actually sucks. we will be honest and say, She-Hulk had like 2 really great episodes, but other than that, it just was poorly written, it was poorly done, and that's not because of her politics, that was just because of the show. But people will equate, woke feminists did a poorly bad show, right. Go woke, go broke, whatever the slogan is. And really, at the end of the day, most of those people are of the same mindset, so you can't say that it's because of the politics of that movie sucked. It just sucked. But then you look at a Captain America type movie, and you're like, if it wasn't where it was that political correctness pushed down our throats type thing, then maybe the story could have been better. And it was just even no matter what side of the aisle you're on, that movie was just really poor of a movie. Yeah.
Which is funny because if you pick apart these characters in these movies, and we really actually do a character breakdown, which we will, we could make some real almost dead-on assumptions of what their own personal politics are. Not the actors, the characters.
Yeah.
So, like, whether you're left or right, Captain America's right, guys. Whether you like it or not, he's a Republican. You know, Tony Stark's a Republican. Whether you like it or not, I mean, he's making weapons. You know, what's he say to Congress there in the second movie? He's like, I'm not going to give you it's my company. Where else but in a Republican pushed way of thinking would that be? You know, now what he is outside of that, obviously we all know they're a little different and they have their own thoughts. You know, but does that really matter when you're watching a movie? It doesn't bother just because he's, clearly Captain America and him have more of a right Republican kind of value to them. Doesn't mean they're Trumpers. Well, they see that's the problem. You get clumped in and you gotta be able to take that out of it. You know, Chris Pratt is the perfect example of he is awesome as Star-Lord. Awesome, and he's an awesome actor, by the way. Anyways, in my opinion. And I think he's done great movies. You know, shout out to, what's that one he did? Tomorrow War. Fantastic. Anyway, if you love sci-fi movies, you love that movie. If you don't like sci-fi movies, you won't like that movie. But he does great movies. He does good, and he plays different kinds of characters. And Star-Lord's awesome, and he's funny, and he's great in it. And I can't think of anyone right now that could play him. I'm sure there's a deeper discussion we can go on. There's people that could, but I don't want anyone else to. And everyone was okay with it until he started putting things online about praying and being Republican. And then they started calling for him being fired. And it's like, that's the problem, guys. That's so separate. Let it be. He's going to be who he's going to be.
Yeah.
He's still, you liked Guardians of the Galaxy 1 regardless. So what's the problem?
I think that's the one thing I'll say that's kind of hypocritical and kind of funny that I just laugh at is that they all love diversity so much, but when you get to diversity of thought where someone thinks a policy is a little different than what someone else would think, all of a sudden that's the no-go zone. They want diversity, but only if you're in the same mindset.
Only if it's their idea. And it's on both ends. This Republican, left, right, all of it. They all do it to each other. I like to stay, unless you've been convicted of a heinous crime, I'm probably going to watch your stuff. You know, would it be tough to put something on that Bill Cosby made right now? Yes. But he's also been convicted of something awful, right? Yeah. You know, but if you're just someone that happens to not believe politically what I believe, then I'm still going to like your movie. You know, there's tons of actors that I know how they feel because I've heard them. And we probably would never get along politically. As humans, we'd probably be fine. But and I still love their movies, and they're the best actors I've ever saw. So let it be that. Just let it be that. You know, and that's kind of how we're going to keep it. You know, we'll call it out every once in a while, but I'm not. You know, only when it hinders the movie. If it's got something to do with the movie, I'm going to talk about it. Yeah. You know, if it doesn't, then there's no need to go into it. Yeah. It's none of our business.
And I want to touch upon something that you said a moment ago when you talked about when you made the revelation that Tony Stark is a Republican. Oh, he actually would. Tony Stark in the comics, a lot of people would actually argue when you look at the Civil War comic book that it really was a Republican mindset versus a Democrat mindset 100%. With Captain America saying, no, we have our freedoms and liberties we're not going to be registered by the government. And then Tony Stark saying we have to because we have to be held accountable and all that stuff. You look at the political landscape and what side of the aisles, no matter the different colors there are on different sides of the aisles, what the general philosophy is. And you clearly see, I mean, it's not that it's ultra conservative or ultra liberal where you can't it's kind of common sense when you see it in politics and you see it then represented in a comic book. That's literally how they view Republicans. Just so happen to be more for smaller government and less government invasiveness, and then Democrats like the nanny state in that regards, and that they don't mind of the government's getting involved in all this different stuff. So when you look at the comic book that way, it's very clear, and I would be hard pressed to find someone to make the case against this, that Steve Rogers did not vote for a Republican. And Tony Stark, probably, I can see him as the billionaire wanting to keep his money, wanting to be conservative in that aspect and not let the government tell him what weapons he can and can't make or things he can and can't make or how to run his company. I could see where he could be one of those type of guys that would vote one way or the other. Like, he may be
For sure.
proclaimed socially liberal, but when he gets to the voting booth, like everyone's going to do when they go into the voting booth, they're going to vote in what they feel is their best interest. And if one side of the aisle convinced them it's in your best interest, you keep more of your money, and that tends to be Republicans who are more of the less tax sort of political party versus the Democrats are usually for increasing or creating a tax. Rich billionaires, I'm sorry to say, you're probably going to be voting a little more conservatively, even if you're outspoken liberal. That's just a general, understanding.
Even in that sense, if we're going to pick that, if we're going to, just because it popped in my head, and I just want to throw it out there for Tony Stark himself, even at his core, though, even if he does flip-flop around for his benefit, at his core, he still believes in small government, and you have what you own. It's yours, and I'm not going to give it up, because even in Civil War, he makes a stand, but in the end of the day, he still agreed with Captain America, with Steve. He still pushed the button in the helicopter, and he still lied to Thaddeus Ross at the end of the day. He did, sure. He's like, we got to pick a side. We picked a side. We, all this. But when it come down to it, the only reason they still had a falling out at the end is because he found out how his mother died.
Yep.
But if that had never happened, he went there he said, hey, look, we're friends now. I'm with you. Let's see what's going on.
Yeah.
So even at the end of the day, he realized that you're right, Steve. You're right.
And I will just say this too, just to throw it out there, and we're probably not going to talk about it again until we actually start talking about the X-Men.
Yeah, because that's a whole deeper thing. Yeah.
But if you are a mutant, you do not want the human government to get involved in your school and your lifestyle, and because we see in the comics what they always do when they do stuff like that, they tend to be a little more bigoted towards them. So I'm sorry to say to anyone who thinks all mutants therefore are these liberal, fancy-wancy type people, you're probably going to be surprised if they were in real life. Majority of them are going to be voting Republican, and even if they're not outwardly proclaiming it, just because they want to be left alone. And that's what the Republican Party typically has preached themselves, is that we're for smaller government being less invasive. Mutants aren't going to vote for someone who says more government to come into your homes because they don't want them in their homes. Right. So they might be a little, Emma Frost, I would argue, is a little more libertarian in that aspect, where, she's not a Republican, but she certainly is not a Democrat. So it's almost like, and that's just the most probably we're ever going to talk about politics, because this really is a Marvel.
Well, maybe there's another great example of that too, though. Just to put it out there.
Yeah.
Because there's a guy who doesn't want your government around. He saw what happens.
Look what happened to him personally, and Nazi
that's
Germany.
Not saying Republican or otherwise. He just doesn't want involvement from anybody to tell him who he's going to be.
Yep.
Which is why it's best to keep all that names and titles out of it, because we could argue in circles about how that all works, right?
Yeah.
So there's no sense in
Yeah, but like we said, this is not a political podcast. But when they decide to insert any political narratives into the movies or the pop culture part of it, we have to comment on it because we're talking about Marvel. And so if Marvel decides to go that route, we'll address it when it comes up, what we feel, what we don't feel, and everyone's entitled to their opinions. You could probably, if you've made it to this point listening to us, either you're interested enough to see where we're going with it, or you either agree with some of the viewpoints that we've already laid out there, and you're probably like, oh, this is refreshing. Someone else actually thinks a similar way type thing. So, and even if you don't think the similar way and you've made it this far, thank you. And we will just continue going from there, and hopefully we could build up this podcast to have more of a diversity of thought and talking about this stuff when they come up. But this is called the Goodell Multiverse Podcast. We're talking about Marvel, superheroes, the movies that we love and enjoy, and dissecting it all down. So, everything they're about.
Looking forward to talking more Marvel and doing some speculating. We got big movies coming up. You know, we got some doomsday stuff we're concerned about, you know, and some things that we definitely going to want to talk about. So our next one, we'll definitely dive into some of that, because we should definitely do some news on what's coming, because it's obviously part of the whole culture of it right now. So
yeah. So I would say, and just from my perspective, the next episode we're going to do a countdown to Doomsday, by the way. So we are going to be watching Marvel movies and reviewing them at every episode. So we won't watch the movie at the episode, but if you want some homework to do and you're listening to this and you want to join us for the next episode and know what we're talking about, we are planning to watch Iron Man 1 again and take notes on it, and we're going to talk about every bit of that movie, from the casting to the story to how it kickstarted the MCU, what worked, what didn't work, and everything. Ike and I are going to have different opinions on some of these movies and some things in these movies, but we recently found out we are definitely a lot more alike when it comes to ranking the movies.
Yeah, we had a good time with it. There's some in the middle that were different, but our top 5 and our top 10, our bottom 10 are pretty darn close.
Yeah. So we'll go through them as the movies come up. We'll talk about any Marvel news that hits, maybe do a trailer reaction here or there when they come out. And we'll play a lot of what ifs ourselves. What if this happened? What if that happened? What if Natasha didn't die and it was Clint? How would that have changed the Black Widow movie? How would that have changed the rest of the phase? We'll get into different topics and just have fun with this. And I hope you join us for a ride, because we're just going to have fun.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And go watch Mortal Kombat, because we need more.
Oh, yes. That's going to be so cool. All right. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. And until the next episode, have a good day.
Have a good night at the movies.
Yeah, have a good night at the movies. There you go.